Well, who wouldn't want Immanuel Iheanacho? Oregon does. Penn State does. Who's getting him, though? Who needs him more? That and whiteout talk on this crossover edition of Locked On Ducks and Locked On Nittany Lions.
You are Locked On College Crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for a crossover edition of Locked On Ducks and Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm Spencer McLaughlin. That over there is Zach Seyko. Look at my weatherman skills here on YouTube. Thanks for making this your first listen or your first view of the day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'll talk about what the Evan Stewart loss means for the whiteout game, the quarterback battle, all on today's show, which is brought to you by our friends at Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. So this is going to be one of the longer drawn out recruitments, Seyko, but we discussed because it's one of the most important recruitments in the class of 2026. Immanuel Iheanacho has as good of a chance outside of Jackson Cantwell, who's going to Miami, to start as a true freshman offensive tackle as anybody in all of college football. Premier player, but I find myself getting lost as much in the impact and the outside part of a particular recruitment as much as I do the inside part, which is who the player is, what kind of guy he projects as, where that fits into the roster and all of that sort of stuff. But this feels, based on what you have told me, one that Penn State would really like to have and maybe needs even more than Oregon, but Oregon fans certainly have expectations. I asked my insiders yesterday how many 5 stars do you think Oregon should get this cycle. They said 4 to 5 or 4 to 5 more than the one they've got right now, and Iheanacho is definitely one of those guys. So how do you feel about Penn State's chances? Everyone seems to think he's going to wind up at Oregon when he commits in early August.
Yeah, and that's precisely why I say this is a more important recruitment for Penn State than it is Oregon. Penn State's not in the middle of a battle right now for 4 or 5, or who knows, even more 5 stars in this cycle. It's also a chance to return the favor to Oregon because they've won a couple mutual recruiting battles here and there. Brandon Finney is kind of the most notable one recently. Brandon Arrington kind of as well, even though that Finney was a Penn State lean for the longest time, and then Oregon swooped in and secured that commitment, whereas Brandon Arrington, it felt like an outside looking in type of situation, but still, nevertheless, Oregon in theory is 2-0 against Penn State in recruiting here and 1-0 on the football field. Iheanacho, I do think Penn State has as strong of a chance as Oregon does from, let's take NIL out of the equation here in terms of, I honestly would have a better pitch. Proximity is a big deal. You got to fly all the way across the country. You're not going to be close to your friends and family anymore. It's a hassle to get them all the way out on the West Coast like that. It's going to be difficult. There is going to be a homesickness element to it. But Penn State has been recruiting Iheanacho for the longest time. That relationship has been there for quite some time, probably almost either the longest standing relationship, if not one of them, among all the college football programs that have been recruiting Iheanacho from the start. So that's where Penn State wins. Is that going to be enough to potentially win over if Penn State is going to be lacking in an NIL offer here? LSU's involved in this too. I really do think it is a pretty equal three-team race, although I would still lean Oregon at this point in time. But I do think the order would be Oregon right now, with Penn State not too far behind, LSU still there, but Brian Kelly and the Tigers, I don't think they have as strong of a push here as our two programs do.
Yeah, it seems like they're the top two, or arguably the top two. Certainly, there was a hot minute, Seyko, where this is a Baltimore kid. Maryland was seen as the leader. I think he even had some crystal balls, and sure, it's someone who's kind of right in their backyard, and from that angle, it can make some sense. I was still impressed Maryland got as far as they did, but they have since faded to the background on Iheanacho. Brandon Arrington, by the way, committing the day that this show drops on June 19th, and it's reportedly down to Oregon and Texas A&M. Oregon would certainly love to pick up a 5-star. I'll be talking about that on my Friday show one way or the other. But Iheanacho is the big Penn State-Oregon recruiting battle right now. I don't know that Oregon and Penn State will go head to head for more than one premier prospect a cycle, maybe two sometimes. Yeah. I just feel like they don't cross paths quite as often. Oregon has shown they can go to the East Coast and they can pull kids out of Penn State's backyard or out of the state of Florida or wherever. Like Oregon can recruit nationally. But besides Finney and Iheanacho, can you come up with, I know Penn State was kind of there on Arrington, but I always, had heard that was more of an Oregon, USC, Texas A&M battle. And then Washington got a late visit in there as well. I felt like those schools were more likely than Penn State. I think for these two schools, Zach, I was talking about this with Roman Tomashoff of Locked On Huskies earlier this week and kind of how many battles you see there. I think Oregon and Washington will battle on the trail for a premier prospect that more than Oregon and Penn State will.
Yes, because this is your classic, vintage rivalry of Penn State versus Oregon. This literally has to do with geography. Okay. Oregon has been, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think been a little more of a nationwide recruiting program than Penn State. Penn State has only branched out further because of conference realignment, and you have to. In conference realignment and NIL, you have to, because now schools are starting to come into Pennsylvania, whereas Penn State was primarily focused, and they still are. That's the number one priority, is to dominate the state. But where they see now, because of USC, I'm going to be talking about it plenty because Penn State's getting hit with a cold spell here in terms of recruiting and priority prospects. And it's because USC, Oregon, Texas, Florida are now starting to push more into Pennsylvania because they can, because they're choosing to. And now where Penn State would see those commitments and the fringe ones where they'd get 3 or 4 extra commits that maybe they wouldn't with a little more resistance is now happening. So Penn State has to go to California. They have to go to Texas. And why not? If schools are going to come into Pennsylvania and try to recruit priority prospects that they wouldn't have in the past, do the same thing. That's why you're seeing, a Darius Dixon, I'm sure was on Oregon's radar, but Penn State did make a strong push and they were able to secure a commitment from the state of California. And that is unheard of. Penn State has primarily been Pennsylvania first, going to DC, Maryland, Virginia, and then kind of branch out further from there. Ohio, and depending on where things are with maybe a coaching change or just a cold streak for another program, that's where you kind of go in and use your leverage, right? When I think it was Luke Fickell took over Wisconsin, Penn State got 3 Wisconsin prospects. They don't recruit Wisconsin that often, but they did because they noticed, hey, there's a moment of weakness here. Wisconsin's not focusing on its main and on the homeland. Let's go into their territory and get some of their premier prospects. And Penn State did that. So it's about strategy, but the game has changed.
I can't believe Penn State isn't making it a priority to go and make sure they pull the 2 blue chip prospects that come out of the state of Oregon every single year. I can't believe that's not like top of their priority list there, Seyko. There are plenty of good football players in the state of Oregon, but it is not exactly what you'd call a hotbed, which is why, to your point, Oregon has recruited nationally. Brian Smith talks about that on my show all the time, that, Oregon has to establish a foothold somewhere. Obviously, they did it in California, starting with Mario Cristobal really strongly, and they still recruit well in that state. Why? Because they don't have they're in a given cycle in the state of Oregon, and this is a difference between Oregon and Penn State. Oregon has 3, maybe 4 blue chip prospects that come out, and the number of 5 stars that come out of the state of Oregon, few and far between. It's just not something you see, which is what makes the dynamic so interesting and such. But of course, these classic Big Ten blue bloods, as we shall call them, the reigning championship game participants in the Big Ten, will indeed play a football game. We're going to talk about that football game, the Evan Stewart impact, because I just want to know what Seyko thinks. I do. That's why we do these sorts of things. And yes, you right there with the big, Superman S on your shirt for Seyko. Obviously, that coming up next. First, this episode brought to you by Monarch Money. Do you ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's really easy to lose track, and that is where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and you start actually building wealth. All-in-one convenience is what they are all about, because instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track your spending, plan long-term goals, all in one app. Take control of your finances today with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Check them out at monarchmoney.com. All right, Zach, so since we last spoke, the biggest news that has come across the Oregon football news desk is that Evan Stewart is likely done for the entire season. He could maybe play at some point. There is, based on what I've been told, there is a 0% chance, basically, that he winds up playing in the Penn State game, which you look at Oregon's schedule, and outside of the rivalry factor with Washington, Penn State is the biggest game on Oregon's schedule. It's going to be a whiteout. College game day could be there. I'm glad it won't be a big noon kickoff, so it'll be watched at a normal hour, and fans on the West Coast.
Pacific time?
Yeah. No, we're saving our 9 a.m. kickoff game for the Northwestern matchup, as God intended, by the way. But I thought about that injury a bit and came back to this Penn State game, because last year, Evan Stewart's best game in his first season as a Duck, by far, was Ohio State on October 12th. And you saw what happened when he got hurt and wasn't able to play in the Rose Bowl. The offense was not the same at all. I don't think that was entirely Evan Stewart. I think that was the layoff. They got out-coached. The offensive line got pushed around. There were a lot of factors in there. But certainly, that played a role in Oregon scoring just 8 points in the first half and 21 points in the game, whereas they scored 32 points in the first matchup. Evan Stewart had 145 yards and a touchdown. And these were not all routine easy catches. He got popped down the middle running a deep cross route. His touchdown was incredibly contested. He beat Ohio State's best corner. So I want your reaction from a Penn State standpoint. You hear that Oregon's projected number one receiver is not going to play in this big-time college football matchup, and your first thought is what?
That's a big deal for Oregon, especially flying across the country. First time in a whiteout game. Penn State's looking for revenge. I will say this, let's provide some context here, that Evan Stewart, maybe he was dealing, again, so correct me if I'm wrong, maybe he was dealing with a lingering injury at that point in the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah, the answer is we don't know, because okay. Dan Lanning says diddly and squat on injuries. Nobody ever knows.
Dan relate anything over here. Yeah, can't relate to that.
You get it.
It's strategic, so I don't blame them, since they're allowed to do that. But Evan Stewart did not have a catch in that game. I know he played in the Big Ten championship, but he was held without a statistic in that game. AJ Harris did a phenomenal job. Part of that had to do with AJ Harris did a phenomenal job. The other reason was Tez Johnson was unstoppable. So you continue to go with the hot hand, since Penn State, for the life of it, could not stop the guy in the slot at that time. But with that being said, Oregon loses Tez Johnson to the NFL, starting tight end. So he is the leading receiver that returns this season. And now you kind of have to act and behave that he's one of those players out the door as well. So you're losing a top 3 player from last year's passing attack with a new starting quarterback going into a hostile environment in is that Oregon's first Big Ten game?
No, Northwestern will be.
Okay, so there we go. Yeah, that's the first bit. Okay.
Yeah. Northwestern in week 3 at Northwestern for that 9 a.m. Pacific time kickoff that I mentioned. I tell you what, the child in me is desperately clinging to the idea that Beth Mowins will be on that call, because if Beth Mowins is not calling the Northwestern football game that kicks at 9 a.m. Pacific time, I don't want to watch it.
So it's all those factors that don't play into Oregon's favor. It's, first time starting quarterback, another Big Ten road game, and further across the country. And you lose a veteran, you lose one of the primary playmakers in this offense. I immediately think of the 5-star freshman that's coming in Dacorian Moore. better days of football. I'm not saying he can't be good right away, but better days. This is the case for everybody. If you're doing something new, if you're doing something for the first time, unless you're Jeremiah Smith, your impact may not be immediate. Okay, so I'm not saying that Moore won't be a focal point in the offense at some point, but in game 5 for Oregon, this early in the Big Ten slate, I imagine that he will be more involved and be more of a factor down the road in a whiteout game in prime time against the likes of AJ Harris. I don't know that that's going to be his best game. Let's say that. Maybe you could prove me wrong. He does have that potential. I just think he'll be better later rather than sooner. So this is a big deal for Oregon because of the circumstances later in the season. Different story, but early on like this, not ideal. Very less than ideal.
Yeah, I think, AJ Harris returning is obviously one of the big keys for Penn State's defense, along with Dennis Sutton, the edge rusher. And I know that you know that, but Oregon fans perhaps have forgotten. But the interesting question that popped into my head when you brought up AJ Harris and how good of a job he did on Stewart in the Big Ten championship game, it certainly seemed like he shadowed him kind of wherever he went.
For the most part.
Does he do that in this game? And if so, who is it on? Because by game 5, you'll have had a month of college football games under your belt if you're the Ducks. And this receiving core has, if you're just talking about the wide receivers, not Kenyon Sadiq. And I think this game is, one thing that flips from the Big Ten championship game. I think Oregon has the best pass catching threat at tight end, whereas obviously it was Tyler Warren last year. I do think it'll be Kenyon Sadiq. AJ Harris is not a guy that covers a tight end, right? He's going to match up on a receiver.
He could. I'm not saying that he couldn't in specialty situations. Maybe you're inside of the red zone and you want to. He's just that versatile. Okay, so because he did cover. Tom Allen finally caught up to it, and I was screaming, not literally because I would have been kicked out. But when I was at the Big Ten championship game from the press box in Lucas Oil Stadium, why isn't Tom Allen putting AJ Harris on Tez Johnson? Just because, just give it a try. And late in the third quarter, he finally figured it out. And oh, look, you had a 3 and out. So if it is necessary to do, I imagine Jim Knowles will try it. There is circumstantial stuff. Zachy Wheatley's probably going to mostly focus on covering Sadiq as he should. So, and I do remember that he scored 2 touchdowns.
Yep, had 2 touchdowns in the Big Ten championship game.
Exactly. So you have to account for him. Again, that was Tez Johnson. That was a Tez Johnson game, but he's still a reliable target and probably somebody that Dante Moore is going to rely on heavily early in the season.
I would think so. Just because he's one of the more experienced pass catchers, regardless of position you now have on this offense. But I do wonder, Jeremiah Smith came out of the gates guns blazing, and that's an anomaly. That guy could be drafted in the top 10 today, and that's uncommon for. And Ryan Williams would not be drafted. Cam Coleman would not be drafted in the top 10 right now. They might be one day, but they wouldn't be right now. And Jeremiah Smith, of course, would. But I think to have 4 games for Dakorien Moore to get acclimated does make me think maybe by that time, and Oregon fans, I think, would be over the moon if they watched that game. And, I was taught, we're talking on our show leading up to it about, hey, AJ Harris is going to have to just go one-on-one Dakorien Moore. That'd be a heck of a fight because Harris is going to be an NFL corner. He's probably one of the top 50 to 70 players in all of college football going into the season. And if he's guarding Oregon's true freshman receiver, that would be really exciting. But would he wind up there? Or is Malik Benson, who's a bit more experienced but hasn't been as productive, is that a guy who winds up drawing the AJ Harris assignment? Or does Penn State look at Oregon's receiving core and the balance that it could potentially have? Because the depth of talent is there. The experience just isn't. So I think there's this intriguing wait and see who pops, who emerges, where's Dante Moore looking most consistently, presuming he's the starter, which I think he will be. All of that comes into play. And maybe Jim Knowles says, you know what, AJ, we're going to stick you on whichever side you want, left or right, you pick. We're just going to keep you out there because Dante Moore's spreading the football around. I think all of that is, I think that's all incredibly likely. I'll say possible because who knows what's likely right now. Like it's June, so who knows, and who knows what this quarterback battle is going to look like. We are going to attempt to answer that question to wrap today's show. Seyko, I've got one more question about Penn State and defending the passing attack for Oregon. We know A.J. Harris is really good, going to be an NFL draft pick probably in the first or second round. What about the rest of Penn State's secondary? Because as I mentioned earlier, this is not the most experienced Oregon receiving core you've ever seen, especially compared to the last couple of seasons with the guys they've had in there. But the talent is everywhere. It's all blue chip guys all over the place who have been waiting for their turn or for their moment or who have been in the program for a long time. So how do you feel about, the guys outside of AJ Harris that'll have to cover these Oregon pass catchers?
I like what Penn State has a lot, specifically at corner. Elliot Washington's going to come to mind immediately for Penn State fans because he swept the winter workout warrior awards that they do. They give out these nominations to player performances in these winter workouts, and no player in James Franklin's tenure has ever had a perfect sweep. He won all 6 of them officially. So that stands out. I personally like Davian Collins a lot. He transferred in from Mississippi State a while ago. He was a project prospect, needed to add the weight, refine some technique, play some special teams. This guy has, I don't like to say this phrase for myself, but he truly does have that dog in him. This is somebody that, but to see it in practice, him talking a little trash to teammates and really setting the tone, the energy. We're in practice. You're my enemy. Iron sharpens iron. And I think that Davian Collins, because he has that personality, that toughness element to him, it's not just, pencil in Elliot Washington. No, you kind of have a co-starter there opposite of AJ Harris. I would lean AC Collins to be that CB2. Elliot Washington could easily be. You don't have a wrong answer with either of them. After that, Kenny Woseley has been someone that's just been mentioned a ton. He's a second-year cornerback. So I'm not going to rattle off all these guys on the depth chart, but I like the first 4 that Penn State has. There's AJ Harris that everybody's going to know about. He's a superstar. He's a pending superstar, but there isn't a significant drop-off with those next 3 guys after him.
Let's pivot to the quarterbacks because this battle is fascinating in that you have one of the most experienced quarterbacks in the Big Ten and in all of college football versus an incredibly inexperienced quarterback. And the time that he has seen on the field wasn't good, but now he's had a season to sit, watch, and learn from a veteran. On paper, Zach, Penn State has the advantage here at quarterback. I'm freely admitting
Thank
that.
you. Thank you for a nuanced take. I appreciate it.
Yes. Well, you know what? That's what they pay me the big bucks for here at the network. But if Dante Moore were to outplay Drew Allar in this game, what do you think that would look like? Do you think it's more likely that Allar struggles at home against Oregon's defense and Dante Moore, plays okay and you look up and go, wow, Dante Moore had a better game? Or do you think it is more likely, in your view, that Dante Moore walks in to Happy Valley and goes for 280 and 2 touchdowns?
Statistically speaking, I think it is very possible that Dante Moore does have the better game. If you're simply box score watching and you're posting instant reactions from there, Dante Moore, because I'm assuming that Penn State wins. I'm assuming that Penn State has the lead. They lean on the ground game. Therefore, Dante Moore is going to have to throw more because Oregon's playing from behind, and you don't need to put the football unnecessarily in Drew Allar's hands. Penn State does objectively have the better quarterback situation because Allar's been through it. He's been on the biggest stage. He's now had the heartbreak element to it. And I think that players actually get better because of those moments. This isn't just an Allar Penn State thing, and I'm the Nittany Lions podcast host. If you put Dante Moore in that similar situation too, I think he would be better because of it. But it did benefit him to have a season with Dylan Gabriel, go through whatever was going on at UCLA. I do think that Allar is absolutely more experienced than him, not just from the fact that he is a year ahead of him in eligibility, but from the amount of starts that he's had under his belt. And with the consistency, those starts that Moore had were at a dysfunctional UCLA program. So there's going to be, again, Oregon's going to be better in the second half of the season. This is not a game that Oregon wants to play earlier in the season. Penn State's going to be right out of the gate one of the best teams in college football. Oregon will be too, but I think there's a better version of them waiting in the second half of the season as more settles in, the chemistry builds, somebody at receiver emerges beyond, someone like Sadiq at tight end. You just have a little more identity. I think there's an identity issue or identity question marks for Oregon at this point in time because there was so much turnover.
Well, I don't think it's an identity thing. I think it'll be an execution thing. I think overall, your fundamental take there is razor sharp in that, Oregon by game 11, I think will be a much better. I mean, we saw it just last year. If Oregon had played Ohio State, even at Autzen, week 1 or 2, no shot they're winning that football game. When did Idaho. They win it? Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Idaho and Boise. Well, Ohio State's not from the state of Idaho, so obviously that's the only thing that's a problem there. But if Oregon plays Ohio State, the week that they played Oregon State last year, doesn't go very well. And this is not a new thing in college football. I do think it'll be even more exaggerated with this Oregon team. You've got a returning center. That helps a lot to keep the offense kind of flow. I think there will be more continuity at the offensive line and such. But I do think that the team Oregon is going to be by week 10 will be more different from week 1 to 10 than Penn State. Absolutely. And if this game had been later in the year, maybe I would feel better about Oregon's upset chances. I lean Penn State, but we'll get out of here on this. How do you feel as a Penn State guy about Drew Allar in big games? Because I think the generalized college football narrative about Drew Allar is really, really negative. I'm guess higher than that crowd. I'm not in the he's a superstar. Watch, he's going to go in a big game for 400 plus yards. Like, no, I've seen enough of that. But I just want your take on what you see from Penn State's quarterback in the biggest games.
He can do it. USC, he nearly had 400 yards. And
that was USC. That doesn't count.
But it was a game where it was back and forth. No, and when the defense, I know. But when the defense let you down on that day, I mean, that was still an offense for USC at the time that was humming. And Drew Allar, despite mistakes, was still able to put the team on his back. Against Oregon, he kept the team. He kept the team because, again, the defense let them down 40 plus points. Come on, Drew Allar.
45.
45. I know. Thank you for the reminder.
You're so welcome.
But Allar as a QB is capable of doing that. Is it something that's going to be routine? Probably not, because of what this team is built around: an offensive line and a two-headed monster at running back. It's not that Allar can't do it. It's that Penn State is going to lean on its other strengths more often than not. And when you're running the football, typically you are winning said football game. So Allar not having this statistical outburst, he's probably not going to win the Heisman because he's not going to be utilized as much as other quarterbacks are around the country. Again, you have not one, but 2 superstars at running back. These guys are both top 5 in all of college football in terms of running backs returning to their teams. Why would Penn State not lean on that? But they did, in fact, upgrade the wide receiver position. So it's just going to be a continued balancing act for Penn State's offense. But if Allar does need to throw 50 times a game, if he needs to push 300, 400 yards, it's not that he can't do it. It's just that Penn State doesn't necessarily need him to.
Yeah, I think it'll be the biggest test in the first half of the season for Oregon's defense because it's on the road. Oregon State can be pesky. Oklahoma State is usually a better team than they were last year. I don't know exactly what to think of them at this point in time, but those games are going to be played at Autzen Stadium, and the only teams that put up over 30 points at Autzen last year were college football playoff teams. Other than that, it was pretty tough to do. This Oregon defense will be different. I still think it'll be really good, but if they can go into Happy Valley and keep Penn State under 30 points, that's been something I've discussed this offseason as kind of the next measuring stick point of progress for Tosh Lupoy as a defensive coordinator. Is, hey, I get that you go and play a horrible Purdue team and shut them out on the road, or you play Illinois, who's a top 25 team, and you hold them to 9 points, and all that that you have 10 sacks against Washington. That's great, but it's the big games. It's the big games where Oregon's defense since Dan Lanning got hired, has not delivered without question. And this will be, I think, the first real chance for them to prove what they can be. And with all those new guys in the secondary, I think it will be really, really fun. Zach Seyko, Locked On Nittany Lions. That's it for today. I'm Spencer McLaughlin, Locked On Ducks. We appreciate you listening. See you next time. And until then, hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.